Welcome to another episode of Linux in Code. Today we're going to be talking about part 3 of our series on creating a JSON API, and today we're going to be dealing with creating routes to access the data models that we created in the last episode. Let's get started. So last time you may recall we created two models. We made a user model and we made an item model. And our item model is pretty versatile. We can use it for a lot of different things. But before we can talk more in depth about that, we need to go over to our server.js file, and we're going to need to do some things here. And starting, we're going to need to install a few additional dependencies. So those are going to be body parser and Morgan. And body parser is going to let us read in data from a post request, so whatever a user is sending us, and Morgan is going to act as a log or a more in-depth log for requests that are coming into our server. So now that we've got those two things installed, we can go ahead and include them. And where we include these things actually does matter. It's not just as simple as drag and drop. You may or may not also remember us installing Helmet a long time ago, and we're going to use that for some rudimentary security things, and we never set it up. So we're going to go ahead and do that now, and that's actually pretty simple to do. All we have to do is after our app is initialized here on line 7, we're just going to call an app.use helmet. And that just implements some basic security settings. It's nothing magical, but it does help a little bit. Next, we need to actually set up body parser to work. And I like to do this below where the server has been created. So I'm going to once again call an app.use, and now I'm going to say body parser. Now, this takes several different things, and you can do things like accept multi-part data with this, or in our case, we're just going to accept JSON. So all we have to do is call .json, and that's it. You'll oftentimes see another body parser reference in Express projects where they're saying extended true or false. We don't want to deal with that here because we're not accepting multi-part data, but if that was something your application needed to do, you could also do that here. And next, we're going to include Morgan. So again, we're going to use an app.use Morgan. And what this does is lets us set up logging for requests that come in. Now, typically you'd want to adjust this for production or development. We'll do that later when we start talking about setting up a production build for this, but for right now, just using the dev version of this is fine. But before we get on to creating our own routes, we're going to need to use an express feature called router. Now, router is a pretty straightforward feature of Express, but it works almost identically to app. It just is a little bit different and makes breaking things up a little bit easier. So we also need to fix another error I noticed. Helmet needs to have a function call instead of just being the name. Otherwise, it'll throw a nasty error on us. Now we need to initialize our router, so we're going to call const router equals express.router and call that function, and then we need to reference it just like we do all the other plugins we're using, app.use router. And now we can include our routes themselves, so we'll say app.use, and I'm going to give this a namespace of /API, so anything /API will get directed to this plugin instead of just falling down to our default route. Require, I'm just going to do this here because I think it makes it easier to track, /, again we have to reference our current directory, /routes. If we don't put that / in, it'll go look in the node modules folder and it won't find it and we'll get an error. So I've referenced this routes folder, but there's nothing in here, so let's make a new file, index.js, and how this is going to work is almost like another mini Express application. We need to establish a router, so that's going to be express, which we need to require .router. So we need to adjust this a little bit. And then we need to export that back to our application, because remember, we're including it. And now anything that we call in here will get mapped directly back to our application. So for example, we can do a router.get, and if we just do a slash in here, this will reference anything that's under the slash API. So again, our request, response, and next object, a new function, return res.status 200.json, and we can just put something in here like, let's say a message and API endpoint, and we can actually test this. Let's go ahead and fire up our application with Docker Compose up. Wait for that to get started. This needs to be uppercase. Now that that's fixed, our application is running correctly. So we can come over here, and we have our request that we tried last time, but now we want to try something a little bit different. I want to just say, instead of hello world, we want to do slash, and that would give us our normal endpoint, which would be welcome to the API. And then if we put slash API on here and send the request, we get our API endpoint, which is what we would expect. So personally, I like to create separate folders for each of the other controllers or routes that I'm making. And I'm going to start first with user. So I'm going to make a route under here for user, but it's going to be a folder. I'm going to make another folder for item. Now in this user and item, I'm essentially going to copy this index file and paste it into each of these because I want each of them to have their own index. And in the index file for our entire routes, I'm going to do something to make it easier to get to these and understand where they should be. So I'm going to do another router.use, and I'm going to say slash user, and this is going to require user, and then we're going to do the exact same thing but for item. And when we do it this way, it makes it very easy to see what is being used where. So this path would be slash API slash user, and this path would be slash API slash item. That's where those are going, and that's very easy to keep track of that way. So in here in user, we now have this index that would return a user endpoint. And again, we can test this by coming in here to our slash API slash user, sending a request, and we get user endpoint. And you can see down in our console, we're also saying that that was the URL that was requested. So what about our data models though? We have this user model and we have our item model, but how do we connect this to our routes? Well, this is essentially going to be what's called a CRUD app, or create, read, update, and delete. So I still like to keep things structured in that manner. So I'm going to again copy this index file, but I'm going to rename it create and paste it again, read, paste it again, update, paste it again, and delete. And for item, I'm just going to copy all of these and paste them over here and get rid of the one duplicate that I made. So now we have all of these files. And we're going to start in user, but we need to update our index file first. So we have a user endpoint, but that's not really useful to us, right? So we're going to do router.use. And this is where this can get interesting, because you aren't necessarily going to be giving each of these a different URL, but most likely they'll be listening to a different method. So router.use is still fine, and for things like get, we may have a get by ID, but in general, just the slash is okay. So we're going to, again, do a require. Remember the dot slash because that keeps it relative to our directory. And I'm going to flip these just so it's the create, read, update, delete. Now that we've done this, I'm actually going to copy that and come over to our item and paste in the same. And because this is relative to the current directory, I actually don't need to change those paths at all. So now that we have all of that structure created and all of our route indexes created, we're going to wrap up for today. And next time we'll get into create, read, update, and delete. Thanks for watching. Hope you have a great day. Take care.